So we have concluded, and of course we continue forever our practice of loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity, the Brahmaviharas, the immeasurables, the boundless heart. And it seems appropriate as the earth is coming alive into spring, with recent UN reports about the state of the earth, to turn our attention once again to bring the boundless heart to the earth, our home, and to all beings sentient and insentient who are our relatives. Our shared life and connection and intelligence. We are all relatives. So I hope and expect to learn a lot during this time. I'm calling on Sangha members to help and all of you to help. I think there's always some fear of overwhelm and of throwing ourselves off some kind of cliff into despair. But that's not the Dharma. I didn't plan it that we do the Brahma Viharas first, but it does seem like a nice kind of segue into it. I thought that I would, we're going to start with Joanna Macy. We need bodhisattvas. We're all bodhisattvas, but we need bodhisattvas that we can look to and say, thank you. I think I saw today that today is Joanna Macy's 93rd birthday. She's still so strong and upright and clear. I want to tell you a couple stories about her, but I thought, first of all, I would just read you in World as Lover, World as Self. Joanna Macy, I hope, is just one resource we'll use, but her ground is so, she's been doing this so long and she's so clear. She begins this book, which is a classic in the introduction of it, from the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, which is the root and ground of the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra, and says, I should not like to have the Bodhisattva think that this kind of work is hard to achieve and hard to plan out. If they did, there are beings beyond calculation, and that bodhisattva would not be of benefit to them. If you think this is hard and impossible to do, how in the world are you going to help anybody, much less yourself? Let that person, on the contrary, consider the work easy and pleasant, thinking they were all the mother and father and children, for this is the way to benefit all beings whose number is beyond calculation. So we'll take up parental mind, grandmotherly mind, the mind of loving kindness, of compassion, of joy, and the ground of equanimity as we open our hearts and our minds and help each other turn towards saving all beings in our deep interconnection. A couple of stories about Joanna Macy, just because I want to. Sorry. I kind of know Joanna. I feel like I know Joanna Macy, but probably a lot of people feel like they know Joanna Macy. But we have had some interaction, so I want to just tell you a couple of them. So the first is when Bruce and I, my husband and I, left Zen Center in probably 1984. We wanted to help. We wanted to go out into the world and help, be of some help in some way. We were very grateful for our time in the monastery, and we had actually for some time been wanting to make the world our monastery. And at that time, which is interesting in terms of what's hopeful, there were very, very few Buddhists and Buddhist organizations involved in social justice or social change. And one of them that was most notable was the Sarvodaya movement in Sri Lanka. Ariadna, I think, is head of it, and Joanna Macy was very involved. So we went and we talked to Joanna Macy, and she made connections, and we were going to go to Sri Lanka with our 2-year-old son, and then civil war broke out. We finally were able to get to Sri Lanka just a few years ago. That's one story. Joanna's been doing this for a long, long time. Second one is when the war in Iraq broke out. I remember, I think it was the first 1,000 people who were killed. And they did, there was a memorial protest in San Francisco in the square in front of is it the State House, where those things usually happen. And they put out 1,000 boots to make it clear what was happening. And there was a labyrinth with that was made out of the shoes of women and civilians and children that you walked through. Again, another palpable experience of this isn't over there and out there. Please take it into your body. It was very big. And I just happened to be in the line behind, walking this labyrinth with Joanna Macy. I was right behind her. And I mean, I'm a pretty feeling person. I later worked with veterans as a way to try to do something to help from Iraq and Afghanistan. But I followed Joanna Macy in. And when she got to the very center of the labyrinth, I'll never forget it because it was so visceral. It was not her mind. Her body was completely dropped to her knees. It was like the earth pulled her down. The grief pulled her down to the earth on her knees. That's where her work comes from. It's not her head, although she's a very schooled person. Probably should cite all of those credentials, but she's got a lot of them. But it's because I think, like all of us, she doesn't have any choice. It's like, what is it to not turn away, and what can we each do that arises out of this visceral body experience of care and love? And the third story, which is a smaller one, but when Myanmar, the war broke out there, I co-sponsored with some other people because Bruce and I had been in Myanmar right after. No, actually, that happened after we were. No, but we were there, and then we came back, and then that country, beautiful Buddhist country, fell apart into war and violence. And some of us put together something in Berkeley as a fundraiser and information to disseminate information and support. And I was so moved that Joanna Macy was there. It's like she's done 100 million thousand things. She didn't have to show up. It was at night. And she was there in the front row like a rock because she cares. So maybe Joanna Macy, maybe that's why I want to call on her and bring forward her teachings and as the ground from which all of this can blossom and move out, because there is a strength and a fearlessness to her that I have no doubt comes from love. So homage to Joanna Macy. Oh, I just found, here's from World is Love or World is Self, Stephanie Kaza, who is also another wonderful activist writer that I'll call on, and maybe others will too. She says of Joanna Macy, Joanna does not waste time in anger and blame, but she takes the path of gratitude and grace. She says, the vision of a sustainable future will require a, quote, burning patience, a burning patience, and a willingness to be completely present for the larger whole. So, what I wanted to bring forward today in particular is a way to enter this or continue to enter it, is Joanna talks about 4 ways of looking at the world. I thought, it's all projection. You know, we're all creating the world. Buddhism is all about perception. So how we perceive the world, of course, will be the world that we will respond to or react to or draw away from or co-create. So I thought it would be interesting to start by looking at these projections. You might want to investigate how they resonate inside of you, because probably there's a little bit of all of them in each one of us. And the more awake we can be, the more we can be aware of how we walk with and for all beings. She starts out, this is Joanna Macy. Life on our planet is in trouble. It is hard to go anywhere. She wrote this in 2007, I should say. The second book that I listed as her source book is a compilation that came out in the last year, A Wild Love for the World. This one is 2007, and maybe before that, because they said this is this was reissued. The one I have is 2007. Life on our planet is in trouble. It is hard to go anywhere without being confronted by the wounding of our world, the tearing of the very fabric of life. We are assaulted by news of tornadoes and hurricanes, fleeing refugees, an entire village buried in mudslides, thousands of bodies under the rubble, another species lost, another city bombed. Our planet is sending us signals of distress that are so continual now that they seem almost normal. Hard to deny it. What we do with it, how we be and respond to the world. That's the path of a bodhisattva. First one is world as a battlefield. She says, many people view the world as a battlefield where good and evil are pitted against each other and forces of light struggle against the forces of darkness. This way of seeing, reinforced by millennia of living with war, can be traced back to the ancient Zoroastrians and the Manichaeans. It can be persuasive, especially when we feel threatened. It's good for arousing courage, summoning up the blood, using the fiery energies of anger and militancy. I just thought, this was written in 2007. This is long before our political era that we are currently in. And I would say this is one of the ways we're coursing in the world. We're seeing it as a battlefield and a battle between good and bad, and evil and righteousness. And I would ask us all to keep looking at that. Doesn't mean to go to sleep. She says this way is also very good for lending a sense of certainty. Whatever the score may be at the moment, or whatever the tactics you're employing, there is a reassuring sense that you are fighting in God's battle and that ultimately you will win. Now, you might not say it exactly that way, but let's investigate. As Dogen would say, please investigate this deeply. She says this point of view is contagious. It spreads rapidly through fear-inducing propaganda. All the ways that it's aggravated, the way history is taught in our schools, The wave of poverty and desperation throughout the globe generates new waves of fundamentalism. It's in the newspapers. We can't move out of it without recognizing its presence, appeal, and tenacity. Let's all take a breath right there and acknowledge its presence, appeal, and tenacity. And that maybe it's not just them over there who are on a battlefield of righteousness. Always important to find whatever we think is other, at least some seed of it in ourselves, so that we can take some responsibility, begin to turn it with loving kindness, compassion, a ground of equanimity, and comes from the ability to look at our own hearts and feel another person's heart. Second way of looking at the world. The second view of the world is as a trap. In this view, the goal is not to engage in struggle and vanquish the foe, but to disentangle ourselves and escape from this messy world. One of my strongest memories of traveling, I think it must have been in Sri Lanka, to an ancient Buddhist, the ruins of an ancient Buddhist monastery. And there were so many wonderful things. There were in rock caves, you could see where people had sat on rocks, probably for centuries, to leave indentations of. They didn't sit on zafus or chairs. They sat on rocks in caves. In deeply committed people. One of the things that stands out is it was a very beautiful carving, and it was a urinal, but the urinal, the carving around it was a carving of the world, so that when you relieved yourself, when you pissed, you were essentially urinating on the world, because the feeling was, in some of the teachings, was just to get away from the world. That was more the way the path of the Arhat was to transcend. Although I want to quickly say that I'm not sure that isn't some historical inaccuracy that didn't also have bodhisattvas right next to it, because it's never either or. Okay, we try to extricate ourselves and ascend to a higher, super-phenomenal plane. This stance is based on the view of reality where mind is seen as higher than nature and spirit is set over and above the flesh. This view encourages contempt for the material plane. It has entered the major religions of the last 5,000 years, regardless of their metaphysics. It's just leave the world. It's messy down here, usually goes with it's messy in the body, and just ascend to a more spiritual place. This breeds a love-hate relationship. This love-hate relationship with matter permeates our culture and breeds a deep ambivalence. We want to both possess and destroy. And these two impulses of craving and aversion inflame each other in a vicious circle. Things like, she says, military buildup and using raw materials in ways to destroy, with the capacity to destroy. Separating mind and spirit, it arises the dichotomies between spirit and flesh, light and dark, reason and emotion, male and female, sacred and secular. We project it onto the earth, the dark emotions, dark-skinned people, power over, societal systems of oppression, and we can see it in our centuries of racism, colonialism, imperialism, exploitation, are all the tragic consequences of the notion that the world is a trap. I think we can see in our own tradition, sometimes the way Buddhism is portrayed or was portrayed, is portrayed, is to not be attached. That the attachment looks like you should separate yourself from the world. Joanna reminds us Buddha taught detachment from ego, not detachment from the world. She says when you try to detach yourself, you can still feel a compassionate impulse to help its suffering beings. But you say to yourself, I think I'll find peace within myself first, and then I'll join actions to stop the war or to help others. She says, Joanna's thought about these things a lot. Another hazard of this view is fear of nature, especially during these uncertain times of immense climate change. It can just be blamed on the wrath of Mother Earth. We separate from her, try to control her instead of trying to understand her more deeply. She says, it is my experience that the world itself has a role to play in our spiritual liberation. Its very pleasures, its very pressures, pains, and risks can wake us up and release us from the bonds of ego and guide us home to our vast true nature. We all have a part of us that would just, well, I should speak for myself. Sometimes it just seems too hard. So let's just figure out how to get out of here. The problem is, where are you going to go? And then once you know that, and you keep coming back over and over, and that there's a path that actually helps us be here. If you can figure out some way to get out of here, I suppose, well, no, I shouldn't even say that. But really look at that part of ourselves. And look at our attachments and how we can make things worse because it's just too hard sometimes and we struggle. Third one, world as lover. In this third view, the world is experienced not as a stage set for our moral battles or a prison to escape from, but an essential and life-giving partner. From the curve of the cosmos to the spinning of atoms, the universe engages in a dance of mutual allurement. You can feel yourself embraced in the primal play of life. So I'll make a confession here. It was beautiful Hindu statues that were women and voluptuous and people playing in eros that served as the antidote to the coldness of Zen for me. That somehow healed something in my heart and said, come home to the body. It's not about going away or getting out of here. But somehow dancing in love didn't seem quite the whole response to me either. part of it. But not all of it. She says, when you see the world as lover, every being can become, if you have a clever, appreciative eye, an expression of that ongoing erotic impulse. Maybe we're more inclined towards this when we're younger, too. Maybe when you get older. But I'm just speaking for myself. You can all investigate. It takes form right now in front of us and in everyone and everything we encounter. This is what it gets transformed into. The bus driver. Oh my God, it's a bus driver. The cop on the corner, the leaping squirrel. As we seek to discover the lover in each life form, we can find ourselves in the dance of Rasa Leela, sweet play, where each of the milkmaids who yearn for Krishna finds him magically at her side, her very own partner in the dance. The one beloved becomes many, and the world itself is her lover. Please go dance with a tree. Don't hold back. And then take a breath. And then we'll come to number 4, the world as self. Just as lovers seek unions, we are apt when we fall in love with our world to fall into oneness with it as well. We begin to see the world as ourselves. Hunger for this union springs from a deep knowing which mystics of all traditions give voice to. She talks about Kabir. She talks about Hildegard of Bingen. Have you ever listened to how beautiful Hildegard? Maybe we can bring forward some of these things too during this time. Talks about indigenous traditions around the globe know the self as one with the world. Nature is alive and seamlessly whole, often symbolized by a circle, the sacred hoop of life. Not only our fate, but also our identity is interwoven with all beings. She talks about the jewel net of Indra, of Huayan Buddhism. I love the jewel net of Indra. There's a gem at each jewel, at each node of the net, and when one moves, the whole thing moves. Maybe one of our Sangha members wants to look more deeply into the jewel net of Indra, so that as part of this world you contain the whole of it. Every thought, word, and deed affects and moves and ripples through the entire web. She says you don't have to surrender your individuality to experience the world as an extended self and its story as our own extended story. As in all living systems, intelligence depends on the integrative play of diversity. Diversity is a source of resilience. This is good news because this time of great challenge demands more commitment, endurance, and courage than any of us can dredge up out of our own individual supply. You can't do this alone. There is no such thing as alone, and neither can I. And I am very stubborn, and it is very hard for me to ask for help. And that might be true of some of you too. My default position is probably that I can do it myself. Maybe that's what these times are about, is little by little we learn we are interconnected. We need each other. We can learn to draw on the other neurons in the neural net and view them with gratitude. The acts and intentions of others are like seeds that can germinate and bear fruit through our own lives as we take them in and dedicate that awareness to the healing of our world. It can dawn on us. We are our itself. We can relinquish our isolation. We can come home again to a world that can appear to us now both as self and as lover, and relate to the world with the full measure of our being. It is a love song. And how wonderfully that we're going to circle around to Thich Nhat Hanh again. Here is a Thich Nhat Hanh love song. Being rock, being gas, being mist, being mind, being the Masons traveling among galaxies at the speed of light, you have come here, my beloved. You have manifested yourself as trees, grass, butterflies, single-celled beings, and as chrysanthemums. I'd probably add in the Sonoma County spring as roses and mock orange and nasturtiums and cherry blossoms and plum blossoms and whatever is right outside your door. The eyes with which you looked at me this morning tell me you have never died. We have all gone on that long journey, and now richer for it, we come home to our mutual belonging. We return to the experience that we are both the self of our world and its cherished lover. We are not doomed to destroy it by the cravings of the separate ego and the technology it fashioned. We can wake up to who we really are, allow the rivers to flow clean once more and the trees to grow green along their banks. World as lover, world as self. So I thought maybe what we could do is put you in small groups. Anything in any of this, anything you identified in yourself,